The first light of dawn crept across the Montana prairie like a wounded soldier, slow, deliberate, revealing the scars of a landscape that had seen too much. Sarah Connor stood at the window of her ranch house, her reflection a ghost superimposed on the endless sea of grasslands and distant mountain ranges. Her hands, roughened by years of ranch work and military service, traced the outline of an old photograph pinned to the windowsill of her parents. Younger than she was now, standing proudly in front of this very house, the ranch was more than just land. It was a living memory, a testament to 3 generations of survival. Her grandfather had carved this homestead out of wilderness during the Great Depression, a time when most men would have surrendered to the brutal landscape. He brought nothing but determination, a weathered rifle, and a promise to create something that would outlast him. Her father had continued that legacy, expanding the property, building the infrastructure that now supported Sarah's solitary existence. She moved with the practiced grace of someone who had learned to be silent, to be watchful. Her morning routine was a ritual of preparedness not born of fear, but of hard-learned lessons from years of military service. The tours in Afghanistan had taught her that survival wasn't about strength, but about constant vigilance. The coffee machine gurgled, breaking the morning silence. Sarah's military-issued tactical watch read 5:37 a.m. She'd been awake for hours, as always. Sleep was a luxury she'd rarely afforded herself, even before her time in the Marines. Growing up on this ranch had meant early mornings, hard work, and constant awareness of the environment. Her gaze swept across the property, 3,000 acres of rugged terrain that demanded respect and constant maintenance. Fences needed mending, cattle required checking, and the endless battle against erosion and wildlife damage was a daily fight. To the untrained eye, it might look like isolation. To Sarah, it was a carefully maintained defensive position. The scars on her body told stories she rarely shared. A thin, white line along her forearm, a souvenir from a roadside bomb in Kandahar. The slight limp that came and went, a reminder of a firefight that had claimed half her unit. Each mark was a memory, a lesson learned in the hardest school imaginable. She wasn't running from the world. She was running toward something, a sense of peace that had eluded her since returning from war. The ranch was her rehabilitation, her therapy. Every fence post she set, every cow she birthed, every crop she tended was an act of healing, of reclaiming something the war had tried to take from her. The coffee was strong, black just like her grandmother had made it. No fancy machines, no artisanal roasts. This was working-class coffee, designed to push you through impossible days. Sarah added a splash of milk, a small concession to comfort that would have made her drill sergeants laugh. Her rifle, a custom-built AR-15 with modifications she carefully selected over years, hung near the door, not as a decoration, but as a tool, like her ranch equipment, like her work boots, like the old truck outside. Everything here had a purpose. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was decorative. The morning routine continued. Breakfast was practical. Eggs from her own chickens, bread she'd baked 2 days ago, some venison jerky she'd made during last season's hunt. No fancy restaurants had ever appealed to her. This was real food that connected her to the land, to her family's history. Outside, the ranch was already coming to life. A coyote skulked near the far fence line. Sarah made a mental note to check that section later. The cattle were beginning to move, creating subtle patterns of movement that spoke of health and routine. To an untrained eye, it was just animals in a field. To Sarah, it was a complex ecosystem she was responsible for managing. Her satellite phone chirped, a text from the local sheriff, an old family friend, just a routine check-in. In these parts, neighbors looked out for each other, even if neighbor meant someone 50 miles away. The message was simple, everything quiet. Need anything? Sarah's response was equally terse, all good, but something felt different this morning. The wind carried a tension that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Years of combat, training had heightened her instincts. When the world felt wrong, it usually was wrong. She double-checked her emergency kit, hidden but accessible, first aid supplies, communication equipment, backup weapons. Not paranoia, preparation, the difference between survival and becoming a statistic. The ranch was more than a home. It was a fortress. It was a memory. It was her last connection to a family line that had always been about survival, about standing ground when the world tried to push you off it. As the morning light fully emerged, burning away the last hints of darkness, Sarah Connor finished her coffee and stepped outside. Another day of vigilance was beginning. Another day of maintaining the delicate balance between peace and readiness. She had no idea how soon that readiness would be tested. The motel room reeked of desperation and cheap bourbon. Fluorescent lights flickered through threadbare curtains, casting jagged shadows across walls that had witnessed countless criminal conspiracies. Miguel Rodriguez sat hunched over a makeshift war room, a stolen laptop, scattered maps, and surveillance photos creating a mosaic of predatory planning. At 38, Miguel was a veteran of the criminal underworld, with a rap sheet that read like a horror novel. His family had been part of the border smuggling networks for generations, evolving from small-time smugglers to sophisticated criminal operatives. The Rodriguez clan wasn't just another gang, they were a machine, cold and calculating, with tendrils that reached into law enforcement, local politics, and the darkest corners of rural America. His younger brothers Carlos, 26, and Javier, 32, moved around the room with a predatory grace. They were more than just accomplices. They were extensions of Miguel's will, trained from childhood in the art of survival and criminal enterprise. "Look at this," Miguel muttered, zooming in on a satellite image of Sarah Connor's ranch. His fingers traced the property lines, the fence configurations, the natural terrain. This wasn't just another job. This was a carefully calculated mission. Carlos leaned in, a tablet in his hand displaying Sarah's military service records, Marine Corps, to tours in Afghanistan, specialized in combat engineering and tactical response. He whistled low. "Not your typical ranch woman." Javier spread out a series of photographs. Sarah working cattle, repairing fences, moving across her property. Each image had been taken over months of careful surveillance. Isolated, no immediate neighbors, no regular visitors. He pointed to a pattern of security measures. But she's not naive. Those fences, those camera positions, she knows defense. Miguel's laugh was cold, calculated. "That's why we'll succeed where others will fail. We're not just thieves, we're tacticians." The plan had been months in the making. Intelligence suggested the ranch held more than just land value. Rumors circulated about valuable equipment, potential hidden assets. But for the Rodriguez brothers, it was more than money. It was about reputation, about proving they could hit targets others considered untouchable. Carlos pulled up financial records. "The ranch is worth nearly $2 million. Debt-free, extensive equipment, cattle herd worth substantial money." He looked up. But that's not the real prize. A USB drive clicked into the laptop. Encrypted files began to scroll. Property records, mineral rights, historical documents that suggested something more valuable lurked beneath the surface of Sarah Connor's land. "Our contact in the county assessor's office," Miguel explained, "says there's potential for significant mineral rights. Oil exploration companies have been sniffing around, but nothing concrete." He tapped a geological survey map. "This could be worth 10 times the ranch's current value." Javier cleaned a set of specialized weapons, military-grade equipment acquired through underground channels. Each piece was meticulously maintained, modified for maximum efficiency. These weren't tools of random violence. They were precision instruments. "We hit at night." Miguel outlined their strategy: disable communication, cut power, maximum surprise, minimum resistance. His finger traced potential entry points on the satellite image. "She's military. She'll be prepared." But prepared doesn't mean invincible. The room fell silent. Each brother understood the stakes. This wasn't just another job. This was a statement, a demonstration of the Rodriguez clan's reach and capability. Carlos pulled out a dossier of Sarah's recent history, military decorations, honorable discharge, no family left, no immediate support network, perfect target, perfect opportunity. "We know her routine," Javier added. "Weekly supply run to the nearest town. Predictable, isolated communication patterns. No regular digital footprint." He showed a series of tracking data. "She's careful, but careful isn't impossible." Miguel's eyes reflected a predatory calculation. Years of criminal enterprise had taught him that every target had a weakness, every fortress had a crack. Sarah Connor was no different. "She thinks she's protected," Miguel said, his voice a low growl. "She thinks this ranch makes her safe." He pulled out a detailed topographical map, marking potential approach vectors. "We'll show her what real danger looks like." The brothers began their final equipment check: night vision gear, communication jammers, specialized breaching equipment, weapons chosen for maximum efficiency, minimum noise. This wasn't a random home invasion. This was a military-style operation outside the motel window. The Arizona desert stretched endlessly, a landscape as unforgiving as the men planning their assault. Heat waves danced above the asphalt, a mirage of violence waiting to be unleashed. Carlos looked up. "When do we move?" Miguel's smile was pure calculation. 3 days. We'll be on her property before she even knows we're coming. The Rodriguez brothers had hunted before. Humans were just another prey, and Sarah Connor was about to become their most challenging target yet. They had no idea what was waiting for them. Darkness was a living thing in these parts of Montana, not the gentle darkness of city nights, but a primordial darkness that swallowed light, sound, and hope. The Rodriguez brothers moved like shadows, their black tactical gear blending seamlessly. With the landscape they had studied for months, Miguel led the formation point position. Rifle at the ready, Carlos flanked the left, Javier the right. 2 additional crew members, Jose and Ramon, brought up the rear. 5 predators, moving with the precision of a military unit, but with the ruthless intent of career criminals. They had chosen this night carefully, a new moon, minimal ambient light, temperature hovering just above freezing conditions that would mask their thermal signatures and minimize electronic detection. Sarah Connor's advanced security system would be their first challenge. 3 miles from the ranch, they killed the truck's headlights, the vehicle a modified black SUV, with custom disabled tracking systems rolled to a silent stop. Each man moved with practiced efficiency, collecting their specialized equipment. Carlos pulled out a complex electronic device, communication jammers active. He whispered, blocking all cellular, satellite, and radio frequencies within a 2-mile radius. A small LED blink confirmation no calls would get in or out of the ranch tonight. Javier worked on the power grid, a specialized cutting tool designed to silently disconnect the ranch's primary electrical connection. Backup generators would be their next target. Isolation was key. Cut off all means of communication, all potential for quick response. Miguel studied the thermal imaging scanner, one heat signature inside the main house, one in what appeared to be a secondary building, possibly a workshop or storage area. Exactly as their intelligence had suggested. Sarah Connor, alone, the approach was methodical. Each step calculated. They moved through the perimeter fence not by cutting, but by using a specialized tool that temporarily disrupted the electronic sensors. Advanced technology meeting rural security systems. Jose planted small explosive charges not for destruction, but for tactical advantage, designed to create controlled noise distractions, to split attention, to create momentary confusion. These weren't amateurs. These were professionals who understood that psychological warfare began before the first shot was fired. Ramon carried specialized breaching equipment, lightweight, compact tools designed to silently compromise locks and entry points. Each piece of equipment had been chosen with surgical precision. As they approached the ranch, the landscape seemed to hold its breath. Cattle in distant fields stood motionless, sensing something was wrong. The wind carried a promise of violence. Miguel's hand signals were precise. Carlos would take the main house entrance. Javier would cover the rear. Jose and Ramon would secure the perimeter and handle any potential backup or escape routes. Each man knew his exact role, his exact moment. The first hint of their approach came with absolute silence. No dramatic movie moment of breaking glass or kicked doors. Just a methodical, professional infiltration designed to minimize resistance. Carlos worked on the main door lock, a high-end electronic system that would have stopped most intruders. But the Rodriguez brothers had spent weeks studying its vulnerabilities. Within 30 seconds, the lock disengaged with a barely audible click. Inside, Sarah Connor's carefully maintained ranch house revealed itself, not a home of luxury, but a space of function, military precise organization, tactical considerations in every design choice, weapons strategically placed, communication devices positioned for maximum efficiency. Miguel's thermal scanner continued to track the heat signatures, one in the main living area, one moving slightly perhaps. In a secondary room, preparation met opportunity. The brothers had planned for every contingency. Multiple entry points, overlapping fields of approach, tactical communication systems that worked on encrypted frequencies they had developed themselves. This wasn't a random home invasion. This was a military-style operation against a target they believed they understood completely. But understanding and knowing were the very different things. As they crossed the threshold, something felt different. The air itself seemed charged. Years of criminal experience had taught Miguel to trust his instincts, and right now, those instincts were screaming a warning he couldn't quite define. Sarah Connor was waiting, not in fear, not in panic, but with the cold, calculated precision of a predator who had been hunted before and had always survived. The invasion had begun, but nothing would go according to plan. The moment shattered like glass. Sarah Connor was never where they expected her to be. The thermal imaging, the careful surveillance, all of it meant nothing in the next few seconds. The first man through the door, Ramon, never saw the trap. A tripwire, nearly invisible, connected to a carefully positioned shotgun. The blast was deafening in the silent ranch house. Buckshot spread like a lethal fan, catching Ramon full in the chest. He dropped, dead before he could even register. Surprise! Miguel's reaction was instantaneous. Down, down. Years of criminal enterprise had honed his survival instincts, but surprise was already lost. The house wasn't just a building, it was a weapon. Sarah had transformed her home into a tactical environment that would make military strategists proud. Every approach was calculated, every potential entry point had been considered, prepared, turned into a potential kill zone. Carlos moved next, his tactical training kicking in, military-grade body armor, night vision, advanced communication gear. But training could only take you so far when the environment itself was hostile. A second. Trap. This one more subtle. A pressure-sensitive floor panel near the hallway triggered a cascade of industrial-strength bear traps, designed not to kill, but to immobilize, to create maximum pain and minimum movement. Javier cursed in Spanish, watching Carlos struggle against a trap that had caught his leg. Blood, pain, the metallic snap of industrial-grade steel, but Sarah was nowhere to be seen. The house felt alive, watching, waiting. Miguel understood now. This wasn't just a home invasion. This was a carefully prepared battlefield. Their primary objective crystallized. The rifle, the one mounted on the wall. If they could separate Sarah from her primary weapon, they would control the environment. Jose moved toward the rifle display, thinking it would be a simple grab. But nothing in this house was simple. The moment his hand touched the rifle's display mount, a series of events unfolded with terrifying precision. A hidden electromagnetic pulse device activated. Every electronic device the Rodriguez brothers carried, communication systems, night vision, tactical computers, died instantly, blind, deaf, cut off from each other. Sarah had been preparing for this moment her entire life. Her military training wasn't just about combat. It was about anticipation, about understanding that survival meant turning your environment into your greatest weapon. The rifle mount itself was a trap, pressure-sensitive, connected to a series of internal mechanisms that would make any approach dangerous. Miguel realized they had drastically underestimated their target. This wasn't a random ranch woman. This was a tactical genius who had spent years preparing for exactly this moment. The house itself seemed to breathe, each room a potential ambush, each shadow a potential threat. Sarah had studied every possible approach, every potential method of invasion. As she had prepared accordingly, the Rodriguez brothers had hunted many targets, but they had never hunted someone who had been hunting them from the moment they entered her domain. Carlos, still trapped by the bear trap, tried to call out to his brothers, but communication was impossible. The EMP had killed everything. Javier moved toward the kitchen, thinking it might provide some tactical advantage, but each step was a potential threat. Miguel's mind raced. This was no longer a simple home invasion. This was a fight for survival, and Sarah Connor was about to show them exactly what survival looked like. Her primary rifle was their objective, separate her from her weapon, and they believed they could control the situation. They were wrong, so terribly wrong, because Sarah Connor had never been defined by a single weapon. She was the weapon, and the Rodriguez brothers were about to learn that the most dangerous predator is the one who has been preparing for the hunt long before the hunters arrived. The first contact was over. The real battle was just beginning. Sarah moved silently through her own home, each step calculated, each breath controlled. The hunters were about to become the hunted, and in the dark Montana night, a storm was brewing, one that would be measured not in wind and rain, but in blood and survival. The Rodriguez brothers had no idea what was coming, but they were about to find out. Time fractures differently in moments of pure survival. For Sarah Connor, the next 80 seconds would become a symphony of violence, each movement a calculated note in a deadly composition she had been practicing her entire life. When they seized her rifle, the Rodriguez brothers believed they had disarmed her. They were catastrophically wrong. The moment they touched the weapon, Sarah was already moving, not in panic, not in fear, but with the cold, fluid precision of a predator who had danced with death in the mountains of Afghanistan and survived. Her first strike came from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. A hidden blade carefully taped beneath the rifle mount found its way into her hand. Not a hunting knife, not a tactical combat blade, but a custom-made instrument of precision she had carried since her first tour. The kind of weapon that told a story of survival before it drew first blood. Miguel, the oldest and most experienced of the brothers, realized something was wrong a fraction of a second too late. Sarah moved like liquid mercury. Years of combat, engineering training meant she understood structures, understood vulnerabilities, understood how to transform an environment into a weapon more effectively than any firearm. The kitchen became her battlefield, a cast iron skillet hanging precisely where she knew it would be most effective became her first projectile, not thrown, swung with the precise momentum of someone who had calculated every possible angle of attack. Jose went down first, a blow to the temple that would leave him unconscious but alive. Sarah didn't want to kill, she wanted to neutralize. Carlos, still trapped by the bear trap, attempted to draw his secondary weapon, but Sarah was already moving. A kitchen drawer flew open, not randomly, precisely, revealing a collection of tools that were no longer just implements of cooking, but instruments of defense. Her body was a weapon more dangerous than any firearm. Military training wasn't just about shooting, it was about understanding human anatomy, about knowing exactly where to strike to create maximum impact with minimum effort. Javier attempted to move toward the hallway. Another trap, another calculated response. The house wasn't just a building, it was an extension of Sarah Connor's tactical mind. Pressure plates, electromagnetic disruptions, carefully positioned obstacles that turned movement into a dangerous calculation. 12 years of military service hadn't just trained her to fight, they had trained her to survive. Each movement was a calculation, each breath a strategic decision. The Rodriguez brothers had hunted many targets, but they had never hunted someone who understood violence as a language, who could speak it more fluently than they could write it. Ramon, the first one through the door, was already dead. The others would soon understand why. 82 seconds. That's all it would take. 5 armed men, 1 woman. Complete and total neutralization. Sarah didn't move like a victim. She moved like someone who had been preparing for this moment her entire life. Her hands were weapons. Her body was a weapon. The environment was a weapon. A tactical knee strike, a precisely aimed elbow, a throw that used the attacker's own momentum against him. Miguel realized too late that they had made a fatal miscalculation. This wasn't a home invasion. This was an execution, and Sarah Connor was the executioner. Each movement was a poem of violence. Each strike a verse of survival, military training, ranch life, years of preparation. They all converged in these 82 seconds. The brothers had studied her, tracked her, believed they understood her. They understood nothing. A final strike, a final movement, and then silence. 5 professional criminals, neutralized, immobilized, defeated, not by luck, not by chance, but by pure, calculated, ruthless survival. Sarah stood in the center of her kitchen, breathing controlled, mind clear. The house was quiet, but the storm was over. 82 seconds. That's all it took to transform from potential victim to absolute victor. The Rodriguez brothers had come to take everything. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous. A predator who had been waiting, preparing, knowing that one day, this moment would come. Outside, the Montana night continued. Indifferent, silent, waiting. The first rays of dawn found Sheriff Tom Garrett standing in Sarah Connor's kitchen, a scene that would haunt him for years to come. Forensic evidence told a story that defied conventional understanding. 5 professional criminals, each with extensive rap sheets, multiple felony convictions, sophisticated criminal networks, neutralized completely by a single woman. The crime scene was a masterclass in tactical defense. I've been a sheriff in this county for 27 years. Garrett muttered to his deputy, Michael Rodriguez, no relation to the fallen criminals. I've never seen anything like this. The bodies were positioned with surgical precision, not randomly dropped, not in chaos, but arranged in a way that suggested complete tactical control. Each criminal had been immobilized with minimum force, maximum efficiency. Preliminary reports from the state forensics team were unprecedented. Sarah Connor hadn't just defended herself. She had systematically dismantled a professional criminal unit with a level of precision that bordered on military intervention. The Rodriguez brothers weren't just any criminals. They were part of a sophisticated criminal network that had terrorized rural communities for years. International connections, political protections, the kind of organization that made law enforcement nervous, and they had been utterly destroyed in 80 seconds. Deputy Rodriguez began collecting evidence. Each piece told a story. Sophisticated communication devices, military-grade weapons, tactical gear that suggested this was more than a simple home invasion. Run the ballistics. Sheriff Garrett instructed. I want to know everything about these guys, every connection, every potential link. The kitchen itself was a crime scene of extraordinary complexity. Everyday objects transformed into weapons, precise strike zones, calculated defensive positions. This wasn't a random home. This was a tactical environment designed for survival. Sarah sat to the side, calm, control, answering questions with the precise, measured responses of someone who had been trained to provide intelligence briefings. They breached the property at approximately 0037 hours, she explained. Multiple entry points, sophisticated communication disruption equipment. Tactical approach consistent with professional criminal units. Sheriff Garrett studied her. A Marine Corps veteran, 2 tours in Afghanistan, combat engineering specialist, honorably discharged, no criminal record, no history of violence, just pure, calculated survival. The forensics team worked meticulously, each piece of evidence carefully documented. Blood spatter analysis, weapon trajectories, movement patterns. The precision is extraordinary. The lead forensic analyst muttered, "Look at these strike zones. These aren't random attacks. These are calculated neutralization points." Sarah's rifle, the one the criminals had attempted to seize, remained mounted. A silent witness to the night's events. The state investigation would take weeks, but the initial reports were clear. Absolute self-defense, no excessive force, precise, calculated response to an immediate threat. Deputy Rodriguez pulled Sheriff Garrett aside. "Sir, these guys are connected. Rodriguez crime family, international criminal networks. This isn't going to be a simple case." The sheriff understood. This was about more than a home invasion. This was about something deeper, something more complex. Forensic evidence began to paint a broader picture. The Rodriguez brothers weren't just criminals. They were part of a sophisticated network with connections spanning multiple states. Drug trafficking, illegal property acquisitions, the kind of criminal enterprise that operated in shadows. Sarah remained calm, cooperative, but there was something in her eyes, a depth, a readiness. She wasn't afraid. She was prepared. The medical examiner's preliminary report was stunning. Each injury precisely calculated, designed to neutralize, not to kill, but to completely immobilize. These are military-grade neutralization techniques, the examiner explained. Precise knowledge of human anatomy, calculated strike zones, maximum impact with minimum force. By noon, the story had begun to spread, not just locally, but across state lines. A single woman, 5 professional criminals, completely neutralized in 80 seconds. The Rodriguez family would be coming. Of that, everyone was certain. But Sarah Connor was ready. Her ranch wasn't just a home. It was a fortress, and she was its most dangerous defender. Sheriff Garrett looked at Sarah one more time, saw not a victim, not a potential target, but a predator who had been waiting. The reckoning had only just begun. The first threat came 3 days after the incident. A black SUV rolled up to Sarah Connor's ranch, dust billowing behind it like a war banner. Not a law enforcement vehicle, not a neighbor checking in, something else entirely. Maria Rodriguez sat in the passenger seat, her face a mask of calculated rage. At 42, she was the matriarch of the Rodriguez criminal empire, a woman who had built an international network of influence through blood, strategy, and an almost supernatural ability to survive. Her brother Victor Rodriguez, a connected political operative with ties to 3 state legislatures, drove. His hands were perfectly positioned on the steering wheel, calm, control. "They'll pay," Maria muttered, not an emotional outburst, a strategic statement. The Rodriguez family wasn't about revenge. They were about reputation, about sending messages, about maintaining a delicate ecosystem of fear and respect that has sustained their criminal enterprise for generations. Sarah Connor had done more than kill 5 of their operatives. She had exposed vulnerabilities, challenged their mythology of invincibility that could not stand. Inside her ranch house, Sarah was already aware. The moment the SUV crossed her property line, multiple systems activated, not just security cameras, not just communication monitoring, a comprehensive threat assessment protocol she had developed during her military engineering days. Victor's phone rang, a burner number, encrypted communication. "She knows we're coming," he said simply. The response from the other end was immediate, cold, calculated. That's the point. Sarah had transformed her ranch into more than a home. It was a tactical environment. Every approach calculated, every potential threat analyzed. The local sheriff, Tom Garrett, understood something deeper was happening. This wasn't just about 5 criminals killed in self-defense. This was about a much larger conflict brewing beneath the surface. Maria Rodriguez represented a criminal network that had operated with impunity for decades. Property acquisitions, political influence, criminal enterprises that stretched from the Mexican border to Canadian wilderness. And now, a single woman had exposed their weakness. The SUV stopped 500 yards from the main house, close enough to be a threat, far enough to assess defenses. Sarah watched through multiple surveillance systems, thermal imaging, acoustic monitoring, communication interception technologies that would make most military units envious. Her military background wasn't just about combat. It was about comprehensive threat assessment, about understanding that survival meant seeing the entire battlefield, not just the immediate threat. Victor Rodriguez stepped out first, wearing a tailored suit that suggested political connections more than criminal intent. But Sarah knew better. The suit was tactical, concealed body armor, carefully positioned communication devices. Maria remained in the vehicle, the true strategist, the one who would assess, evaluate, calculate. "Miss Connor," Victor's voice carried across the empty landscape, "we need to talk. No threats, no posturing, just a statement of intent." Sarah's response was immediate. A series of defensive systems activated. Not weapons, not aggressive, but comprehensive monitoring. Every possible communication channel tracked, every potential approach assessed. Sheriff Garrett was already aware. Multiple state and federal agencies had been quietly notified, not because Sarah needed protection, but because something much larger was unfolding. The Rodriguez family represented a complex criminal ecosystem, political connections, economic influences, the kind of network that operated in shadows, and Sarah Connor had just dragged those shadows in the harsh, unforgiving light. Maria's phone buzzed. Encrypted communication from multiple sources, political contacts, criminal networks, legal representatives. "She's not just a target. One message. Read. She's a potential exposure point for our entire operation." Victor approached closer, careful, methodical. Sarah's response was already in motion, not reactive, proactive. Multiple communication channels activated, encrypted files prepared. A comprehensive documentation of the Rodriguez family's potential criminal activities gathered, not in the last week, but over years of careful, systematic intelligence gathering. This wasn't just about self-defense anymore. This was about exposure, about bringing decades of criminal enterprise in the harsh, unforgiving sunlight. The Rodriguez family had built an empire on fear, on the ability to operate without consequence. Sarah Connor was about to show them consequence had a name, and that name was hers. Victor stopped, 50 yards from the house, close enough to communicate, far enough to be safe. Maria watched, calculated, assessed. Sarah waited, prepared, ready. The storm was approaching, and she would be its eye. The transformation began quietly. Sarah Connor didn't become a symbol overnight. It was a gradual process, like water wearing away stone, persistent, unstoppable, inevitable. Women's self-defense groups found her first, not through media, not through official channels, but through a network of whispers that moved faster than any newspaper could print. A Marine veteran, a ranch owner, a woman who had faced down 5 professional criminals and emerged not just alive, but completely in control. Her first speaking engagement was at a small community center in Billings, Montana. No glamorous stage, no professional lighting, just a room full of women who had survived, who understood what survival really meant. Preparation isn't about being the strongest, Sarah told them. Her voice was calm, controlled. It's about understanding that your mind is your most powerful weapon. The stories began to spread. Local law enforcement started inviting her to training seminars, not as a victim, not as a curiosity, but as an expert in tactical defense. Her ranch became more than a home. It became a training ground. Veterans groups reached out. Women's empowerment organizations requested workshops. Universities invited her to speak about crisis management and personal security. The Rodriguez family watched, calculated, waited, but Sarah was always 3 steps ahead. The intelligence she had gathered, years of careful documentation, systematic tracking of criminal networks, began to bear fruit. Federal investigations opened. Political connections were exposed. Victor Rodriguez found himself under federal scrutiny, political appointments questioned, business connections investigated. Maria Rodriguez's international network began to fracture, not through direct confrontation, but through the slow, methodical exposure of their criminal infrastructure. Sarah didn't seek revenge. She sought accountability. Her workshops became legendary, not about physical strength, but about tactical thinking, about understanding that survival was a comprehensive strategy. Your environment is your first weapon, she would tell her students. Your mind is your most sophisticated defense system. Veterans recognized something in her, a depth, understanding that went beyond simple self-defense. The media tried to sensationalize her story. She refused interviews, refused to be turned into a spectacle. Instead, she spoke through action, a scholarship program for veterans learning agricultural skills, training programs for rural women in personal security, workshops that transformed vulnerability into strength. The Rodriguez family's attempts at retaliation became increasingly desperate. Hired investigators, legal threats, attempts to discredit her. Each attempt failed. Sarah had spent years building a comprehensive defense, not just physical, not just legal, but a total system of protection and exposure. Sheriff Tom Garrett became an unexpected ally. The investigation into the Rodriguez family expanded. What had started as a local incident became a federal investigation. Political connections unraveled. Criminal networks exposed. Sarah's rifle, the one they had tried to take, remained mounted in her home. A silent reminder, a symbol. She wasn't a victim. She was a catalyst. Women began to travel from across the country, not for sensationalism, but for understanding. Her ranch became a sanctuary, a place of transformation. Veterans found healing. Survivors found strength. People discovered that vulnerability was not weakness, it was the first step toward true power. The Rodriguez family's empire didn't collapse overnight, but it began to crumble. Investigations, exposures, the slow, methodical dismantling of a criminal network that had operated in shadows for generations. Sarah continued to work her ranch, continued to train, continued to live, but something had changed. She had become more than a person. She had become a movement, not through loud proclamations, not through media campaigns, but through quiet, persistent strength. The rifle remained mounted, not as a trophy, not as a weapon, but as a reminder that true power was never about the weapon. It was about the person holding it. As winter approached the Montana prairie, Sarah Connor stood on her porch, watching, waiting, prepared. The Rodriguez family had come to take everything. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous, a legacy of survival, a testament to human resilience, and a warning to those who would mistake silence for weakness. The prairie wind whispered, carried her story across endless miles, not a story of violence, a story of survival.